NewsGuru is a news aggregator that allows users to create custom news streams on any topic of their choice, but only using those news sources and news contributors that they find to be reliable and relevant. This is NewsGuru's home screen, and as you can see, it efficiently organizes all of a user's news streams. Now, these are either news streams that the user created themselves or news streams that were created by other users within the NewsGuru network that this user is following. So for example, this user here is following streams on psychology, social media. They're following a stream on Minnesota sports, which Mr. Robbins might be interested in, since I know you used to cover Minnesota sports earlier in your career, and even a stream created by our own Ben Owens around rap music. So wider range of different news topics. Once you decide a stream that you're interested in, let's say sports news, you click through it and you're brought to a page that has all of the most recent and relevant news content based on the contributors and news sources within that stream. So under this stream, sports news, there's contributors such as the NBA, ESPN, ESPN Stats, and SportsCenter. Once you find an article that you're interested in, let's say this LeBron James article, you click through it and you're brought to the article to consume, but you do so within the NewsGuru environment. Therefore, you have seamless navigation between different streams or different articles, and NewsGuru is able to maintain control of the user experience. Once you've consumed the article, you can give feedback on the article itself or the contributor, which works with this feedback process that Kim mentioned. And you can also share or save or share the article with friends. So the biggest issue with any social media-based news content is that it's frequently inaccurate or off-topic. This creates a mass of unsophisticated, hard-to-sort-through news media that most aggregators simply push to their users based on a topic or a keyword. But what NewsGuru has done, once again, as Kim has mentioned, is they've created this proprietary algorithm that actually goes in and kind of sorts through and ranks the different potential news sources and news contributors. That way, when a user goes in to create a news stream, let's say on Minnesota sports, they can choose only those contributors or news sources that they find relevant to them and reliable. The algorithm works in two parts. On the front end, it really does go and scan tens of thousands of social media profiles every single day to pull in key metrics like frequency of posts, number of followers, number of likes and shares, and uses these metrics to create this credibility rating, that we're calling it. And then on the back end, as previously mentioned, users within the NewsGuru environment, once they consume content from these different sources and contributors, they're able to give this feedback loop that also continually in real time updates the rankings and the ratings for each of the contributors based on each topic. So that's kind of an overview of the product itself. I'm going to pass it over to Alex, who's going to take you through NewsGuru's industry and competition.
Thanks, Ed. So I want to give a few thoughts about the industry NewsGuru is operating in before I'll move on again to the app itself. So if you look at this picture, you can see in the past, newspapers have been the #1 source of information, and then, of course, radio and TV came up, and today, that seems to be a little different, what you can see on top of here. There are mobile devices in our environment, in our lives, so just to give a few numbers, like today, 44% of the United States population uses a smartphone. A third, 30% has tablets, and what's interesting about that is that around 3/4 of that numbers are news consumers on their mobile devices. But digitization also means that in general, the barriers to enter the flow of communication are lower. So the consumer is not only a consumer anymore, he's also a producer, he can be part of it. And digitization means also something else. And that means that one single consumer can also receive individual content, and not like in the past, in the newspaper industry, that he had to buy like 10 different newspapers if you want to read about 10 different sources, which is totally different today with the mobile devices. That's on the one hand an opportunity, but on the other hand, that's a little problem because, I don't think you want to have like 10 or more different news apps on your mobile device. It would be much better to have all in one application, to have your personalized news stream all there. And that's basically what NewsGuru does, but also what a few other news outlets do, which are the competitors of NewsGuru. You can see here Feedly or Flipboard. That's what I would say are the main competitors to this application. But we as a team found out that there are some advantages NewsGuru has in contrast to them. And that is what we call the 3 Cs, which would be credibility, contributor-based aggregation, and user control. And credibility because you can add your established sources you want to have in your own news stream, and you have to give permission to what you want to have in your news stream. And on the other hand, you can give reflective feedback, and that leads to the second point, which is contributor-based aggregation, which is because of the algorithm who identifies who is an expert in which field. And as Kim already mentioned, its ranking is based on user feedback, and as he already said, there are more than 30 million social profiles right now. And then the third point, user control. We say the single user has a high control just because what we already said, the user can decide which sources he wants to have, and he can give feedback and an evaluation. So in general, we identified two major points of differentiation why NewsGuru is a great opportunity. The one is high content quality, and the other one is the nice intuitive design NewsGuru has. But there's another one, and this is the team, the management team. A strong management team is important to be successful in this high competitive market. So on the one hand, there is Adam Rusin, who is the CEO, and he's currently involved with a few other startups, so he has some entrepreneurial experience. And on the other hand, there's Kim Gerritsen, who is an advisor to NewsGuru and works on marketing problems for startups. But hey, there's still something to do for us as a team, and what we did and want to present to you now is our 3 tasks and our 3 questions we asked. The first is, who is the target audience for that product? The second is, what are potential adoption rates? And the third is, how can we monetize the application? And Ben now will talk a little bit more about the target audience.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. All right, so we wanted to start with a top-down approach, kind of segment the market and see what this niche sports market actually, size-wise, what it was. So we started with the entire U.S. population per the census, which is around 318 million. This led to us going to Nielsen, and from there we found that about 80% of Americans consume sports programming. So that leaves us with about 225 million, of which about 25% consume their sports news on mobile devices. So that leaves us with around 62 million as a potential target market that we're going to be, approaching with this app. From there, we wanted to kind of validate that, and so we looked at the top 5 sports providers, being Yahoo Sports, ESPN, Bleacher Report, and CBS Sports. And we kind of predicted that these users of these sources are going to have a higher propensity to be using mobile apps than the general population. So we predicted that about average, male and female comparatively, and with a slight discrepancy, there's a potential for about the same mobile users to corroborate that approach. From there, we kind of went into and categorized into 3 categories, these user bases. One's going to be your casual user base, the people who like the NBA or they like football, but they don't have one team they follow or one coach they like, or they probably don't even know who Mizzou hired. So those are going to be your casual users. We're predicting that's going to be a majority of that user base, around 40 million, and they're going to have a lower adoption rate because they're just not as interested in a tool that's going to aggregate sports news for them. That being said, if we move up into our fanatic group, these are people who have an allegiance. They're Boston Red Sox fans. They're Minnesota Twins fans. They have a direct need for information on specific subtopics within sports. And then we go one step further with fantasy sports. These are going to be your people who play fantasy baseball, fantasy hockey, fantasy football. They're going to be people who check their phones multiple times a day for news updates that directly impact what they do with their sports. And so we predict a much higher adoption rate, around 20% with these users, which we'll get into in the next slide. But based on these predictions, we're ending up with about 3 million projected users after 2 years. So fantasy sports, the reason we have this huge adoption rate and the reason we think they're going to be the bulk of our user base is that more than half of fantasy sports users have been willing to pay for content. That and more than 75% use more than 4 sources of news to get their constant updates. So a tool that enables them to aggregate that really comes in handy. And if they're already paying for it, they have much more on the line for keeping up to date. As Forbes estimates, with the 33 million plus fantasy sports users, the industry alone is around 40 billion plus, and that puts the entire fantasy sports industry, including all realms, almost greater than 100 billion. Okay, now that I've talked about the adoption rates and the target market, I'd like to pass it off to Lindley.
Okay, now I will walk you through 3 possible monetization strategies we designed for NewsGuru. First, after we analyzed the interface of NewsGuru, we find out that the streams itself is the perfect carrier for native ads. Native ads means that the sponsored content is well integrated into the overall user experience so that the message is delivered smoothly and efficiently. Let's take a look at the screenshot. Now here, this news stream became the Nike sponsored news stream. It's intuitive and it's seamless. But to stick with our credibility principle, we will make sure that our users will be able to differentiate it as a sponsored stream. And our NewsGuru will be successful because the seamless experience creates opportunity for our advertisers. And the advertisers will be willing to use our service because sports fans, they are a great target audience because sports fans show a higher income level and they are more loyal in their media use and they usually have more concentrated user consumption habits. For example, generally sports fans are great consumers of fast food, technology, and automotive products. And so we suggest NewsGuru to pitch to potential advertisers in those three sectors to start with. And on the other side, mobile ads itself is very attractive to advertisers because it's flexible, it's intuitive, and importantly, it's very cheap. And from our market research, we see mobile ads can cost as low as 75 cents per 1,000 clicks for advertisers, compared with the $17 that many major websites will cost you. And after research, we suggest NewsGuru to set the price at $1.25 for smartphone ads per 1,000 clicks, and iPad ads would be $3.50 per 1,000 clicks. And it's to the NewsGuru's advantage that advertisers now, they are willing to pay more for for iPad ads. So in the current American market, the ratio between cell phone users and tablet users is 3 versus 1, and the average daily page view for sports fans is 5. After the calculation, we found out that the projected annual revenue for NewsGuru can be $10 million. So that's a big number, but our team member, Edwin, will break down it in our financial part. Secondly, in the near future, we also suggest that apart from native ads, NewsGuru should establish the paywall in the near future. A paywall means that NewsGuru can create a couple of news streams that aggregate especially those paid content from other news websites. Currently, for our competitors, ESPN and Sports Illustrated both have premium membership that costs about $40 per year. As a news aggregator, NewsGuru can charge less than that and negotiate the content cooperation with those other news agencies and websites. Last but not least, we also suggest NewsGuru to keep in mind they should prepare for an exit strategy in the remote future. In the current landscape of the tech startups, nobody actually sticks to the exact same business for more than 5 years of time. And recent cases in the field, like CDiG and WhatsApp, those are great apps, but they themselves don't necessarily generate great income. But they will be acquired by larger tech companies at inflated prices. This can also create profits for the companies. And that's what also NewsGuru can look to in the future. As NewsGuru is well attached to bigger social network sites like Twitter, this can be a great opportunity for NewsGuru in the future. Now I'll hand over to Ed to talk about our financials.
Thank you, Lindley. So the first thing we had to do to create the financials was to generate a user adoption curve. So we felt very comfortable with the target market analysis and adoption analysis that Ben did that got us to about 3 million users at maturity. But how we get there and how short it takes is really dependent on a monthly user adoption rate. So we decided to use, which is pretty standard for a tech startup company, the Bass diffusion model to create a simple S-curve that we could fit to our 24-month projections. And as you can see, we project user adoption to grow slowly at first and get to about 750,000 users by the end of the first year. And then, as is standard with most new technologies, it will ramp up at the beginning of year 2, and by the end of the 24th month, we'll be around 3 million users that we projected. Based on these number of unique users, as Lindley had shown, we can actually calculate our projected ad revenue. The number of users times the number of views per user times that mobile CPM number that Lindley generated gets us to a revenue in the first year of just under $1 million, in the second year of just over $7 million, and by year 3, they're over a $10 million a year ad company. Once we had our revenues projected, we could do a full 3-year cash flow analysis. As is the case with most startup companies, within the first year, NewsGuru loses money, about $1 million. But by the middle of year 2, they're profitable, and by year 3, they're almost a $10 million a year positive cash flow company. The aggregate revenue over the 3 years is about $20 million, and average the aggregate cash flows during the same period is just over $13 million. So pretty profitable company. We understand that when you do financial modeling for a startup company, that there's a lot of assumptions that go into those numbers. So we took the 3 biggest inputs into our model and ran a break-even analysis to get a sense of how sensitive those assumptions really are. So in terms of unique users, we did a lot of analysis and are comfortable with those 3 million users. But the good news for NewsGuru is that they can break even if they get about half of those number of users, 1.4 million. In terms of views per day, all of the analysis that we did tells us that sports users each user views has about 5 views per day, but NewsGuru can break even with as little as 2. And lastly, the CPM charge analysis that Lindley took you through a few slides ago got us to about $1.80 on average mobile CPM charge, but NewsGuru can break even if they charge as little as 60 cents per mobile CPM. So lastly, we implemented some milestones that we think that NewsGuru should monitor to make sure they're on their path to success. The user adoption numbers you see here in 6-month intervals come directly from that user adoption curve that we showed earlier, and is really the biggest indicator of whether they're meeting their goals. We also think they should have some metric of user engagement. We decided that user engagement really should be looked at based on active streams. And active streams we define as either a newly created stream that month or a stream that had been created in the past but is now newly followed. We think that this is a very good estimation of just how engaged the NewsGuru's users are. And then lastly, you need to have some metric of quality control. We feel by the end of the first year that NewsGuru should achieve 85% positive user feedback on the website. And then by the end of the second year, as they improve the customer experience, they can get that number as high as 95%. So just in conclusion, we feel that NewsGuru is truly competing in a unique space and has some significant competitive advantages. They are the most credible and user-friendly option, and they have a very strong management team executing on their business plan. We also feel that we adequately answered the 3 questions we were tasked with. What is the target audience? We were able to identify the $62 million mobile sports news users, and we were even able to identify this niche fantasy sports segment that has an unmet need for sports aggregation. We also explained what we think adoption will look like, which over 24 months they'll be able to get about 3 million users. And lastly, we explained a few different ways that NewsGuru can monetize their user base based on native ads, eventually charging a paywall, and then hopefully having some sort of potential to be acquired in the future. And in closing, we did all of this analysis focusing specifically on the sports industry. The truth is that NewsGuru is bigger than that, and it really contains all the different news sectors that are out there. But the idea was that as long as NewsGuru can succeed within the sports industry, that they could then extrapolate that success out to all of the other industries as well, and we feel that that's something that's definitely going to happen. So with that, we'll open it up for questions.
Nice job with the presentation. I think, to me, it comes down to this idea that you're in a space that's pretty crowded right now. There are a lot of aggregator news readers out there, and without knowing anything about your algorithm, I think you're right. Credibility is it's key in all of these tools. Let's say that your algorithms are rock solid. Surely these other competitors are also have algorithms too that aim to do the same thing. Maybe yours are better. Let's give you the benefit of the doubt. Your financial models are all built on a pretty strong user base. You haven't talked a whole lot about what you're going to do to market your apps so that you can attract these users. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so actually maybe Kim can help. So that a part of the project, or for us, it wasn't a part of the project to talk about exactly how it's going to be marketed, but one thing I would mention is we built from a bottoms-up approach to come to this 3 million users by segmenting the population into these different usage types, the fanatic and we got to 3 million and we were wondering if that was high or low, and then we looked at Flipboard, and of course it's our major competitor and they're extremely successful, but within the same 2-year period, Flipboard was able to acquire 20,000 users, so we thought that maybe 3,000 wasn't that big of a jump. But I can hand it to Kim to talk a little bit more about how they plan on marketing.
So once the product is right, the company does have the resources for a marketing budget aimed at app downloads. And if you've read the news in the last week, Twitter, Facebook, and Google all have new products, advertising products, aimed at app downloads. They're really competing with one another, meaning pricing is really quite good in terms of paid advertising to get app downloads. And then the bet is within the app, the algorithms present these credible sources to you, but then you, the individual user, are asked to weigh in and comment on the credible sources that the app has presented, and then share your own views, new sources, or your own views on the credibility factor from the app with others. So the bet is the social media sharing aspect of the app will help drive adoption.
And sorry, just to add to that really quickly, because I'm actually somebody who's extremely skeptical of the whole concept of an algorithm and then all of a sudden it's a different product. But we didn't really have time to hit on it, as full as we'd like, but we don't think that a lot of the other news aggregators are doing the type of stuff that NewsGuru is doing. I mean, they really employ as much as it's like 10 different engineers that on a daily basis, their jobs are just to aggregate all this social media content and to create these rankings. So I don't think other companies have these rankings, and what Kim was pointing to was kind of the back-end user feedback, that once there's a mass of users that are then rating the content themselves and rating the contributors, that's another feedback process that creates these rankings that I think actually are different than what you're seeing in Zeit or Flipboard or some of these other competitors that simply just push the content to you and doesn't really have a sense of who's reliable and who's not.
Yeah, I guess I just want to build on kind of the question on that is Google's trying to attempt to solve this problem with authorship moving forward, I think, and you can do some organized streams through Google Plus and through some other places to narrow down. So are you worried that somebody like Google or some of these bigger companies that are doing news aggregation would see this feature that you've added on the front end where people can provide feedback and just add that to what they're already developing?
Or maybe they'd acquire us.
Yeah, I think exit strategy wise, I mean, if they really liked the tool that much, I think that it would be much simpler for Google to just buy the tool than develop it on its own. But that being said, I mean, even with Google Play, Google went from Google Currents and killed that product because it was awful. They're now doing Google Play Newsstand. And yes, they factor in the authors. I mean, you can highlight who the author is, but currently there's no author-based credibility rating system. So you can't actually tell, yeah, you may recognize names from your daily news sources, but there's no actual rating system for them. And implementing one, yes, it's easy enough to do, but as you know, it's very common with a big industry that has stakeholders with, that want to make sure their shares are profitable. They're not going to just implement something without seeing it tested. And if they see that NewsGuru does test it and does make it a successful run, as is seen with other companies like Zeit. I mean, Flipboard bought Zeit for its ranking system. So I think that it's a very realizable exit strategy being acquired.
Yeah, for example, if Google wants to develop its own ranking system, that would take maybe like a couple of more months ahead. But NewsGuru has already been doing this, have been focused on improving its aggregating system for like 1 or 2 years. So in order to instead of putting those time efforts and cost efforts for those big companies, they would rather just acquire NewsGuru.
Okay, so my other question's it's unrelated, so new topic. It seems like that everybody who tries to do these types of things where you're based on advertising and incremental cents for each ad and that kind of thing, it's hard to build the revenue stream. So I was wondering, did you consider using this as a tool and maybe going selling it to businesses or people in marketing who need to find influencers in their vertical, and selling it that way?
I was going to say.
Originally, it was a part of our analysis was not just to do B2C, but to look at the B2B, but then it went out of scope. So I think maybe Kim can speak to it.
Yeah, it went out of scope, but it's certainly there in the background. In fact, we designated it the corporate newsroom. Could this technology power a corporate newsroom to constantly monitor and bubble up credible sources about your industry or your competitors or whatever. So certainly when we fix it and make it right in B2C, that exists as a possibility for the future.
Yeah, I think especially as users start to see or companies start to see that users like the intuitive nature, I mean, it wouldn't be hard to monetize a white labeling of the app.
Can you talk a little about how pay models might affect what you're doing? You gave some examples of some sports sites, for example. I think it was, I can't remember exactly, but I think it was Yahoo, CBS. Okay, so let's say for the sake of argument that they all move to pay models in the next 6 months, and clearly places are all trying to do pay models. And even if you're a subscriber to ESPN, you have to pay a little extra money, I think, to get some content. So how does that affect what you do? Because ultimately, if they're pay models as aggregators, you know, you've got to figure out how you're going to get content
Yeah,
from
and so
somewhere
I think-
for free.
I mean, hypothetically, you could work it in a few ways. One is that NewsGuru could be in talks with these content providers and have a license through them that then, as a user came up against a paywalled article, you know, they could buy a single view or they could buy 5 views, and that way you're buying it through NewsGuru, who has a license with these paywall providers. Essentially, you could also offer just certain features or a certain limit to streams within NewsGuru that then, by adding this paywall, by paying for a premium subscription service, you unlock more full features that would evolve as the app progressed.
Yeah, and just to add on that, sorry, one of the, unfortunately Adam, the entrepreneur, couldn't be here, but one of the things he first explained to us before we focused in just on sports was that he sees this paywall working well with things like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, where somebody wants economic or market information, and they're consistently going and getting stopped by paywalls, that maybe there'd be some opportunity there, because we will already have all the users' subscription information. We'll have their name, their address, we'll be able to very quickly sell them an in-app purchase that will allow them to sign up where they might not go through that process and sign up for the Wall Street Journal on their own through the real process. So it might actually add more value to these third-party companies that we partner with, because it's such a quick and seamless way to get them to sign up for it.
And for you to partner with them, what sort of incentive do you think they will have to even partner with you?
I think the biggest would be user base. I mean, just kind of like WhatsApp. I think at our 2 and 3 year marks, if we see that our user base is quite significant, then that would lead to, I mean, they would have interest in a large sports user base. I mean, currently, no, our user base is smaller, but I think in the 12-month and 24-month period, it could easily be looked at if the user base expands as we hope it will.
You could select many, many words. You know, one would, might be ironic on free websites that you aggregate the content and then you create a paywall to charge for that free content, They might use other words than ironic. So I mean,
I think when the paywall would come in, I think, yeah, you may be right. Choice of words, paywall may be different. In terms of the app itself, a paywall would be more so just unlocking more features. But in terms of addressing paywalls of premium content providers, I think that the easiest way to do it would be to work out some sort of licensing negotiation between NewsGuru and the providers, and then the end user doesn't have to worry about who they're buying their licensing from and what they're paying for. I mean, they just pay through NewsGuru for that premium content to be in addition to the free content that's already aggregated.
I think that the market that you guys picked to start with is a good place to start because of, like you were saying, the high incentive for engagement and paying for things. I was just curious if you had identified where else it could go after that, specifically for bringing in female users or other types of users, maybe?
I think personally, I mean, my fiance, the things she aggregates when she uses it are recipes and Pinterest tips. So I think, I mean, you could definitely go into like the home and living realm with DIY recipes, constant tips from Martha or whomever. And I think that could be another potential subsegment.
You talked about losing $1 million a year to begin with. How do you plan to fund your startup? I mean, do you have a successful affiliated business that's gonna fund this, or are you going to be looking for venture capital or what?
Yeah, quick answer. The parent company, I said this is a startup within a startup, but the parent company, Echidna, is a digital agency that is quite large in terms of revenue, profit, clients, And so the company can absorb losses as well as have a marketing budget that I just described. And if the model is proven, then the company has talked about going for outside capital. But today, it can fund it within its very large 200-person digital agency business and have some marketing dollars to spend as well.
I'm sorry, just going back to the last question, I didn't want to forget to use this point because I think it's a good one, but where does it go next after sports? An interesting idea and something that we're doing right now. I'm in an angel investing course here that's run by W.D. Allen, and we basically meet with entrepreneurs and invest sums between $30,000 and $50,000 in different startups. And one of the things that we've started there is some sort of a way to kind of push news to ourselves so that way we're all up on startup marketing and startup legal things and things of that nature. And I actually pitched NewsGuru to them last week, and it's going to become our standard interface that we're going to use. We're going to create based on reliable and relevant streams. We're going to create a stream that we're actually going to have that the class is going to basically be updated with every day on different information. So there are many other uses for it outside of sports.
Questions from the audience?
Or lunchtime.
I'll ask one more question. Can you talk a lot about credibility and reliability, and what is reliable to one person is a rag to somebody else. So talk about that a little bit.
I mean, the user has control. So if I rank something as, I think this author is very credible, very reliable, and Alex disagrees, then his rating factors into that as well, and he can choose that. One of the nice features we didn't even mention is that any stream that exists on NewsGuru you can clone and then modify. So if I really liked his stream on sports, but I didn't like one of the people that he wrote, I just could instantly just delete them from my stream, and it doesn't affect their credibility rating. On the grand scheme of things, but within my own, the app would recognize that I didn't want them to be showing content.
And just to add to that, as we said, on the front end, there's this algorithm that's not personal at all. It just goes in and ranks you based on these metrics you see on the left. But then once you read an article and you click on the Provide User Feedback button, you give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, that's when it brings you to this back-end user feedback where a user can categorize the content based on whether it's funny, whether it's mature, whether it's whatever, and then also gets to rank it in all of these different, whether or not a user is actually going to go through this process is one thing, but if they can get users to do it, then it's going to be a much higher level of user feedback than like or dislike. It's going to have a lot more information behind it.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.